with We Charge Genocide and Asada's Daughters. She is one of the 8 youth delegates who traveled to the United Nations and the lead author of the Shadow Report submitted to the United Nations Committee Against Torture. Paige also has the privilege of organizing with elementary school students of Village Leadership Academy on actions such as the Reclaim MLK March, Stephen Watts Memorial, and Rally for Reparations. Tonight's panel will be moderated by Professor John Mearsheimer, an accomplished theorist in the field of political science and international relations, and his book, The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, investigates the influential role of the pro-Israel lobby in affecting U.S. policy in the Middle East. We regret, however, to inform you that Veronica Moore from Fearless Leading Youth will not actually be able to join us for tonight's panel, as previously announced. Unfortunately, Veronica was formally banned from the university due to her activism in a campaign to open a trauma center at the university hospital to treat victims of gunshot wounds. Although the university has finally agreed last month to open a trauma center after years of community organizing, unfortunately, the ban against Veronica still remains in place. Before I hand over the mic, I want to ask everyone in the audience to please turn off or silent your mobile devices. We kindly request that audience members hold all questions and comments until the Q&A session, which will follow tonight's speakers. I also want to take a moment to thank the Global Voices Program, University of Chicago, International House, the Posen Center for Human Rights, the Department of Political Science, and the International Studies Program for sponsoring tonight's event. So without further delay, I'd like to hand over the mic to Professor Mearsheimer. Professor John Mearsheimer, please join me in welcoming him on stage.
Thank you very much, Hoda. I want to say a few words about the format. After I spend about 5 minutes explaining how we're going to work this tonight, I'm going to turn it over to Omar, and he's going to speak probably for about 30 minutes, and then we'll go to Paige May, and she'll speak for 10 minutes. And then when we're done with that, we'll go to question and answers. And here's how we'll work that. There's a microphone down here, right behind this gentleman with the camera, and people should line up at the microphone. And you get 1 minute to either ask a question or make a statement. And there's nothing wrong with making a statement instead of asking a question, if you see fit. And what we'll do is we'll take the questions in bunches of 3. So we'll take 3 statements or questions from individuals, and then I'll turn it over to Omar to respond, and then we'll go to the next 3 people. We have formally a total of 1.5 hours, but I think when all is said and done, we have 2 hours. So if the speakers keep to their time limit, as they promised me they would, then we should have plenty of opportunity for Q&A. And of course, my experience, and I think Omar agrees with me on this, in these sorts of situations, the Q&A are really important, and it's important for people to say what they think and for him to have an opportunity to hear what you're thinking and to respond appropriately. Finally, let me say I fully understand, as I'm sure all of you do, that this is a very controversial and important subject, and people have strong feelings. That's a good thing, and it's wonderful that we can all be here tonight to air our views on this subject. It's very important, however, that everybody on both sides of this issue, or on all sides of this issue, since I'm sure there are more than just 2, be respectful of those that you disagree with. That is really the University of Chicago way, and it's why for so many decades this place has been a symbol of free speech. Anyway, without further ado, I want to turn it over to Omar Barghouti, and welcome to the University of Chicago.
Thank you, Professor Mearsheimer. Thanks to the organizers, especially the student organizers. And I'm really happy to be with you again at the University of Chicago. I will try to frame my talk to start with the situation today in Palestine, as I'm sure it's on many people's minds, our perspective on what's happening, connecting that with a theoretical framework, and then to BDS, explaining a bit what BDS is about. And I'll end with that. So I would like to start by quoting the iconic Jewish American writer I.F. Stone, with such a prophetic vision back in 1967, I.F. Stone wrote, quote, "Israel is creating a kind of moral schizophrenia in world Jewry. In the outside world, the welfare of Jewry depends on the maintenance of secular, non-racial, pluralistic societies. In Israel, Jewry finds itself defending a society in which mixed marriages cannot be legalized, in which non-Jews have a lesser status than Jews, and in which the ideal is racist and exclusivist." Well, those were the good days in 1967. It's gotten much worse since. In the Washington Post a few days ago, an Israeli former soldier, as he identifies himself, called Asaf Gavron, wrote an article, an op-ed, titled "Confessions of an Israeli Traitor," in which he said that Israel is becoming an increasingly intolerant, boiling, and racist. There's a racist tone to the discourse in Israel. And he's saying Israelis are receiving a message that we are superior to others, that we control the fate of those lesser others, that we are allowed to disregard laws and any basic notions of human morality with regard to Palestinians. And he says, "We seem to be in a fast and alarming downward swirl into a savage, unrepairable society." So looking from an Israeli perspective, he says, we need to end the occupation for ourselves, not for the Palestinians, for ourselves. We have problems with that, but we can discuss it later. So he says we have to end the occupation so we can legitimately ask for and receive support from the world, so that we can return to being human. Now, this return to being human is very important. The great Brazilian educator Paulo Freire once said that by dehumanizing the oppressed, the oppressors also dehumanize themselves. They lose their humanity as well. So Gavron seems to be agreeing with that. So what is the situation today? What is he describing as this descent into this savage racism, as he describes it? Well, it's very important to see that the current popular Palestinian upheaval, the current phase of Palestinian resistance, has broken out spontaneously in reaction to exceptionally repressive policies of the most racist, settler-dominated, and far-right government in Israel's history. Since Benjamin Netanyahu took office in 2009, Israel's descent into unmasked right-wing extremism has accelerated alarmingly. Number of Jewish settlers increased tremendously in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem. Racism has increased tremendously within Israeli society. Anti-democratic laws have been passed at an alarming rate by the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. Israeli apartheid policies, whether in the occupied territories or within current present-day Israel, have also, those policies have increased to a very alarming level. Some examples are the boycott law, the anti-boycott law, which was upheld by the Israeli Supreme Court just a few months ago. In fact, on a recent visit to occupied Palestine, South African parliamentary speaker Baleka Mbete wrote, quote, "Apartheid in South Africa was a picnic compared to what we have seen in the occupied territories." So the seemingly random but persistent Israeli violent attacks against Palestinians are in fact part of an official Israeli strategy whose goal is to intensify the ethnic cleansing, or what Israeli establishment figures call Judaization, between quotes, of occupied East Jerusalem, especially the Old City, and to eventually take over Al-Haram al-Sharif, the noble sanctuary where Al-Aqsa Mosque sits. This was done with the historic Ibrahimi Mosque in Hebron after a massacre in 1994, when Israel divided the mosque and gave half of it, basically, to extremist Jewish fundamentalist settlers. In fact, about this policy, in 2012, a UN Special Rapporteur on the right to adequate housing accused Israel of pursuing a strategy of Judaization, which is a term for colonization. They're just giving it that religious ring to it. So in that UN report, she said, quote, "From the Galilee and the Negev to East Jerusalem and the West Bank, the Israeli authorities promote a territorial development model that excludes, discriminates against, and displaces minorities, particularly affecting Palestinian communities, side by side with the accelerated development of predominantly Jewish settlements. Even the United States Department of State, in a 2009 report, said that many of the national and municipal policies in Jerusalem were designed to limit or diminish the non-Jewish population of the city. So this is the background to what we're seeing today. Intensifying ethnic cleansing, it's gradual, yes, it's not en masse. We're not seeing thousands of Palestinians being thrown out, at least not yet. But we're seeing smaller communities being thrown out of their houses, especially in occupied East Jerusalem, especially in the old city of East Jerusalem. This is not the whole story. The ethnic cleansing is the most important story. But the ongoing occupation for decades, the denial of basic rights, freedom of movement, the basic civic rights, other than political rights, the right to self-determination, for decades, is what boiled up to this extent. So we see phases going up and going down. No one can sustain the same level of resistance forever. But we're seeing a phase now of an up because of the intensification of the racist policies by the State of Israel. So the current shaking off of Israel's chains, if you will, almost entirely led by groups of young Palestinian men and women, with a disproportionately high number of women in many of those protests, is not just a struggle to decolonize the Palestinian land, it's certainly that, but it's also a struggle to decolonize Palestinian minds. And that's even more important from my perspective. And I'll explain a bit about this decolonization of minds. Ze'ev Jabotinsky, one of the great Zionist ideologues back in the 20s, wrote a very, very important pamphlet called The Iron Wall in 1923. The title is Colonization of Palestine, Agreement with Arabs Impossible at Present. Zionists were very honest then. They called it colonization. He said, quote, "It is utterly impossible to obtain the voluntary consent of the Palestine Arabs for converting Palestine from an Arab country into a country with a Jewish majority. The native populations," he says, "civilized or uncivilized, of course we're not, have always stubbornly resisted the colonists, irrespective of whether they were civilized or savage. So every native population in the world," Jabotinsky says, "resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the danger of being colonized. Hope is the real danger. As long as the colonized have hope, it's a real problem." So, what does he suggest? Zionist colonization must either stop or else proceed regardless of the native population, which means that it can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. And that iron wall is a wall of hopelessness. To give up any possibility of resisting colonization, to accept colonization as fate. You cannot resist it. We have overwhelming power. You're so weak, disenfranchised, divided. You cannot resist. So you might as well adapt, live with it. This is what the iron wall basically meant. So decolonizing the minds becomes not some minor thing that people have to do on the side when they resist. It's the very essence of resisting. You start with decolonizing your minds before you go on to the project of decolonizing the land. Part of colonizing the minds of the Palestinians is through denying them the right to education. And I'll give some very important examples in Palestinian history about denial of the right to education, especially in the first Intifada, 1987 to 1993. Soon after the Palestinian Popular Uprising, or Intifada, broke out in December 1987, Israel shut down all Palestinian universities. By February 1988, all Palestinian universities had been shut down, with some universities like Bir Zayt University being shut down for 4 consecutive years. Basically, higher education was deemed illegal. And then all 1,194 schools were shut down for a much shorter period, but they were all shut down. And then kindergartens were shut down as well. In fact, a Jerusalem Post article in April 1989 just blatantly, reported that the Israeli police had, quote, uncovered a network of illegal classes held by West Bank universities at private high schools in East Jerusalem and the YMCA, and so on. A warning was delivered to university administration that under no circumstances can you teach in houses or anywhere else. If we find anyone teaching or any students carrying books, we will take appropriate measures against them. Basically, Palestinian education was criminalized, and it went underground. A Jewish Israeli researcher at Ben-Gurion University, did his PhD on the pillage and destruction of Palestinian books during the 1948 Nakba, the ethnic cleansing of the majority of Palestinians and the establishment of the State of Israel as a Jewish majority state. This researcher, it was reported in Yedot Achronot, a major Israeli paper, on January 28, 2010. He said that Israel plundered and destroyed tens of thousands of Palestinian books in the years after the state was established. It wasn't in the midst of the quote-unquote war, it was after, well after. In fact, librarians went together with the military, house to house, library to library, and confiscated Palestinian books. Those books that were considered unworthy were destroyed. Tens of thousands of Palestinian books were destroyed, and many other thousands were kept until today in Israeli libraries, especially university libraries. This researcher reached the conclusion that Israel destroyed the Palestinian books in the framework of its plan to, quote, Judaize the country and cut off its Arab residents from their nation and culture. He even compared it with Western colonialism, other aspects of Western colonialism. He said, quote, this was a cultural massacre undertaken in a manner that was worse than European colonialism, which safeguarded the items it stole in libraries and museums. In Israel's case, they destroyed most of the items that they pillaged. So to decolonize the minds, after seeing some aspects of colonizing the minds, it's important to resist, but to resist in a way that can lead to an ethical outcome. So let me explain this. The ethicality of resistance is extremely important. Before getting into that, people say, well, what about Palestinian violence? I mean, you mentioned about the colonization and Israeli apartheid, and what about Palestinian violence? We should stop both sides. Well, no violence starts out of the blue. It starts because of a cause. In cases of oppression, the beginning of oppression, as the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire says, the onset of oppression is the beginning of all violence. Any violence beyond that is, by definition, a reaction to the initial violence, the violence of creating an oppressive system. When you have a slavery system, the master does not have to be violent against his or her slave, but just the fact that they're enslaving them is violent. So when the slave resists, even violently, that he's not to blame and she's not to blame. It's the master who started the initial oppression. Regardless, to maintain the ethicality of our resistance, we have to face this question, which is a very difficult question for human rights activists like myself. How to resist oppression to maximize the possibility of rights for the oppressed, while minimizing the possibility of causing unjust harm to the oppressor community. Not an easy question at all. They're oppressing us, so why should we even care about causing unjust harm? And what's unjust harm? If they're oppressing us, what's unjust harm? We have to deal with this question all the time. What's just and unjust? And whether we're targeting the oppressor as oppressor simply because they're oppressor, or we're targeting a community as such. If you rid the oppressor of being an oppressor, then they're human. So we can live with them as humans if you take out the oppression aspect. So we have no problem with the human in front of me. We have a problem with him or her being an oppressor. So we always have to make that distinction. We're fighting the oppressor in them, not them as humans, which is a difference. So there's no collective responsibility. We have to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of collective responsibility. So the boycott, divestment and sanctions call, which was issued by the absolute majority of Palestinian society in 2005, by absolute majority I mean all political parties, all trade unions, women's unions, farmers, academics, just about everyone in Palestinian society signed on that call in 2005. In one line that's not very quoted in the media for some reason, we call upon conscientious Israelis to join us in the struggle to isolate Israel to achieve our basic rights under international law. So immediately we're planting the seeds of an ethical outcome where we do not exclude anyone. So BDS from the beginning started as an inclusive and continues to be an inclusive, anti-racist, anti-sectarian movement, and that's extremely important for our values. So one of our main partners in Israel, Boycott from Within, a group started in 2009, and some of the people in this room were part of that process, is playing a very, very important role. They're predominantly Jewish Israeli activists. They're few in numbers, but they're playing a very important role in educating the world about the oppression that's happening to Palestinians, and in saying that this government, this establishment, this Zionist establishment, if you will, in Israel, does not speak on behalf of all Jewish Israelis. Certainly not on behalf of all Jews, but even not on behalf of all Jewish Israelis. We stand with Palestinian rights, and we call on the world to boycott Israel to achieve those rights, just as apartheid South Africa was boycotted to achieve the rights of the people there. To achieve this ethicality, we cannot forget at any point that it's also important to be effective. In other words, if we are serious human rights activists, it's not enough to have the right slogan, it's not enough to have the right principles. If you cannot achieve results, then it's not worth it. If you're not goal-oriented, if you're not effective, strategic, and you have actions and campaigns that actually lead to change, then it's not worth it. We're human rights activists. We might be good at what we do, but we're not stupid. We don't like to waste our time. We like to invest our time in the most effective and efficient possible way. So we don't raise slogans that are not conducive to action, because resistance is not an academic exercise. It's a very ethical praxis, reflection and action to change an oppressive reality. If it's just an academic exercise, it's like an armchair type of resistance. I raise a slogan and do nothing about it, or that does not entice people to do any action. The whole point is mobilizing action to change an oppressive reality, based on understanding that reality. So, since BDS was established in 2005 till now, we've achieved far beyond our most optimistic expectations. In the early stages of BDS, it was mostly academic and cultural boycott. So allow me to explain that in a minute. The academic and cultural boycott that we've called for since 2004, actually, target Israeli institutions, not individuals, which is a major difference from the South African boycott. I was personally active in the South African anti-apartheid movement when I went to school at Columbia. And then we boycotted every single individual as well as institution in South Africa, because that's what the South African majority asked for. That's what the ANC asked us to do. The Palestinian boycott, in contrast, does not ask for boycotting individuals. It calls only for boycotting institutions. It's not because individuals are not complicit. It's because we do not believe in any McCarthyist political testing, who's a good Israeli and who's a bad Israeli. On principle, we've rejected that. We adhere to the position that a boycott of institutions can always be easily justified by showing the record of complicity of that institution, which is much murkier, much more difficult with individuals. We don't want to judge people based on their identity, certainly, and not on their views, but on the level, institutions on the level of the complicity of the institution in maintaining Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. But why did we start BDS? I mean, what are the rights that we are calling for in that BDS call? So the absolute majority of Palestinian society have called for this boycott, divestment, sanctions call, but to achieve what? What's the end game? We're always asked. Well, we are not the leadership of the Palestinian people. BDS is part of the Palestinian resistance, and it's the most important international solidarity with Palestinian struggle for rights. So we focus on the rights. As a human rights movement, we are rights-oriented. We took a rights approach rather than a political approach. In other words, we focus on the three basic rights where we have a consensus, plus minus, among Palestinians. End the occupation, end the system of racial discrimination, and the right of return for refugees. So why did we address all three rights? Not just ending the occupation, which is easier to understand, more convenient, and so on. Because the Palestinian people are made up of three main parts because of the different phases of colonization of Palestine. 50% of the Palestinian people are in exile, not allowed to go home because they're the wrong type, the wrong identity. 12% of the Palestinian people are citizens of present-day State of Israel, and 38% are in the West Bank and Gaza, including East Jerusalem. 38%. So those who claim to support human rights writ large and only address ending the occupation are basically addressing most of the rights of 38% only of the Palestinian people. Most, not all the rights, because even among the 38% in the West Bank and Gaza, there's a very large minority of refugees or IDPs, internally displaced persons, who were ethnically cleansed during the Nakba in 1948, in refugee camps across the West Bank and Gaza, especially in Gaza. A huge majority are refugees. So we've got to address the three basic rights: end the occupation, end the system of racial discrimination, which meets the United Nations definition of apartheid, and I'll explain that in a minute, and the right of Palestinian refugees to return. Those are the minimal rights for the Palestinian people to exercise our inalienable right to self-determination, which is inalienable under UN laws and regulations. Now, since 2005, we started with a lot of successes in the academic and cultural boycott, but Israel became really alarmed when the boycott started affecting the economy. We faced that question a lot. Yeah, BDS sounds morally compelling and so on, but is it effective? I mean, Israel is so powerful, supported by the US government, European governments. There's complicity even at the United Nations level. How can you ever achieve anything with this non-violent human rights movement based on international law and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Good luck with that. This was a main argument since 2005 till 2010. But the things started to change when there was an economic impact that's very noticeable. I'll just give a few examples. RAND Corporation, not exactly a very progressive pro-Palestinian think tank, issued a study just recently that predicted that if BDS continued at the current pace, it would cost Israel in the coming 10 years between 1 to 2% of its GDP annually. That is $44 to $88 billion in 10 years. So we're not talking peanuts. We're talking a serious economic impact on this regime of oppression. UN Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, issued a report very recently showing that foreign direct investment in Israel in 2014 plummeted by 46% in comparison to 2013. A World Bank report revealed by Electronic Intifada showed that Israeli exports to the occupied Palestinian territory in the first quarter of 2015 dropped by 24%. And in 2014 it dropped even further than 2013. A very important aspect that explains what's happening, why is this economic impact happening, is some companies as well are feeling the heat. Veolia is a good example. It's a French corporation that was involved, past tense, finally we can use it, was involved in several Israeli projects that violate international law. After we started the campaign against it in 2008, November 2008, last month, Veolia completely moved out of the Israeli market. They shut down their entire operation in Israel after losing tenders around the world worth more than 20 billion, with a B, $20 billion. Other corporations like G4S, that's involved in private prisons in this country, mass incarceration of black and brown people in this country, is also, and the Arizona Wall, is also involved in several Israeli projects that violate international law. And we've campaigned very effectively against G4S to the extent that they've promised to get out of the Israeli prison system by 2017. But we said that's too late. We're continuing our boycott campaign. We'll only believe you when you see your back going out of the door. So we're having serious impact on many of those companies. Also, Israel's brand, thanks to mainly to BDS and to the far-right shift in Israel. You've got to give credit where credit belongs. Without Netanyahu, Bennett, Ayelet Shaked, and those wonderful liberal progressives we have in the Israeli government, we couldn't have achieved what we did in such a short period, relatively speaking. In 10 years, BDS achieved what it took South African anti-apartheid activists more than 30 years to achieve. So we're going much, much, much faster. Part of that is because of the far-right shift in Israel, certainly. It helps make things move much faster. And we have good strategies. We have very good strategies. We're not just good at raising slogans, we're good at implementing campaigns that actually lead to results. The BBC Globescan, one of the most important opinion polls in the world, has for the last number of years shown Israel competing with North Korea in popularity. Imagine, North Korea. On the third or fourth worst perceived country in the world. Israel spends hundreds of millions, if not billions, on propaganda. North Korea, nothing, zero, but they're competing neck to neck. Even in the United States, where Israel always claimed that a majority supported it, which is true still, but things are changing. Even in the Democratic Party, a recent poll of opinion elites in the Democratic and Republican parties showed that about half Democratic opinion elites view Israel as, quote, racist state, and 31% of Democratic political opinion elites, after understanding what BDS was, 31% were ready to support BDS against Israel. Just imagine. Of the opinion elites, not the most progressive women and blacks and Latinos in the Democratic Party, the opinion elites of the Democratic Party, which I reckon must be mostly white. But even they, 31% feel that, yeah, BDS is something they can support. So things are changing even in the United States, and that's very important. So to end, I have 2 minutes, 3 minutes. To end, it's very important to stress a point I mentioned in passing. When mentioned G4S and the private prison system, the mass incarceration in this country, it's very important to mention the links, the intersectionality of struggles, which is very important now. It is not an opportunistic unity that we try to portray. Working with Black Lives Matter, with Latino rights groups, with LGBT groups, with all other groups, to form kind of a symbolic coalition that looks good and powerful. It's not that. It's much more organic. It's much, much more organic. The enemies, if you will, are very united. The big, large military corporations, the lobbies, and they're very, very united. The Israel lobby and the military industry lobbies, and they're very united. It's about time we get united too. It's essential to be successful, to have a certain unity in struggle among progressive communities in this country and around the world, and they're very connected. They're very connected. While public schools are being shut down in Chicago, military aid to Israel is increasing. They're discussing another $1 billion extra to Israel. How can the United States afford to pay $4, $5, $6 billion annually to Israel while it's shutting down public schools in Chicago? So the struggles must be connected. And to end, the BDS National Committee, which is the largest coalition in Palestinian society that leads the global BDS movement, after the Ferguson events, after the killing of Michael Brown, issued a statement, which is a rare occasion that we issue a statement on the killing of one person, but it wasn't one person. It was a certain state of affairs that we had to comment on. We titled our statement, "Stop U.S. Repression of African Americans in Ferguson." And then it went beyond Ferguson, of course. So I'll just quote a small part of it. We recognize that Michael Brown's murder is part of a system that claims the mantle of some Anglo-American civilization while stereotyping and endangering African Americans, especially young men, based on their race. U.S. racial justice and labor activist Bill Fletcher Jr. commented on the wider context of Ferguson, saying, quote, "The racial terror against African Americans seeks to ensure that we remain immobilized and disorganized," end of quote. But from what we've seen as Palestinians, our sisters and brothers in Ferguson have not been intimidated by this terror. They've shown the world their inspiring capacity to mobilize and self-organize in the most difficult situations, in empowering actions against repression, and in struggling for social and economic justice for equal rights. We believe that we must connect our struggles. We believe very strongly that the oppressed of the world must stand united in the face of racism, racial repression, and injustice, Together we can prevail. Together we shall prevail. Thank you.
I am pleased that Paige May beat the Chicago traffic, although I'm sure it was a heroic fight, and made it here. She's going to speak now for the next 10 minutes, and then, as I said before, we'll go to Q&A. Paige.
Thank you, and apologies, sincere apologies. That was really embarrassing when I walked in and saw this. Yeah, so I'm here, and my heart has calmed down. So I'm going to begin, and if my clock could wait to start, because I have some words from the other speaker who wasn't able to come, Veronica Morris-Moore. She sent in a statement. It reads, "Peace to everyone," and this is especially for the U of C cops that are in the room right now. "Peace to everyone. I am deeply disappointed to be contributing only a brief statement to this discussion instead of physically participating in the panel as I intended to. As many of you may know, I, as well as 8 other people who participated in a direct action that took place in Levi Hall on June 4th of this year, have been banned from any and all University of Chicago property. Although I am not the only person banned from campus, the administration has gone through unnecessary measures to prevent me, a Black queer youth organizer, a lifetime resident on the south side of Chicago, from doing what is necessary for my community and people. It is so vital to identify intersections between struggles as oppressed people. I organized because I grew up poor, and very young in my life, the effects of that poverty and its political nature shaped my reality. But once I was introduced to organizing through the process of exploring the legacy of my ancestors, I understood that our realities are created through policies that make it law to hunt, murder, and steal from our people. Policies that are rooted in ideologies that are racist. As an organizer, I am led by the movement for Palestinian liberation. As a Black, poor, queer, cis human being, I have experienced the violence that capitalism and its politics unleash on us as a means of control and torture. And from following the genocide of Palestinian people in Israel, I have learned institutions, governments, military, and police officers, and neoliberal policies must be targeted by direct action that is coordinated by oppressed people. The same government that deploys militarized security and police officers in our community schools is the same one that should be held accountable for the military occupation of Palestine. And although I cannot be present in the flesh, I am grateful that there is space to talk about the struggle to liberate Black people in America and Palestinian people in Palestine. The politics that shape our realities and what it's going to take to liberate our people are inextricably linked. Thank you for struggling and your... Sorry, one second. Let me find it. It's photos of it. Thank you for struggling and your continuous support of struggle. I can affirm that when we fight, we win. And I hope that everyone has faith that I, the Trauma Center Coalition, and Black people in the movement will always be committed to the fight. Sending all my love. P.S. I'll be on campus sooner than later. Veronica. I usually talk at rallies and things. I get kind of anxious when it's this kind of environment. So I like to chant. It helps calm me down. So if y'all would join in with me. So I was reminded recently by a friend that the anniversary of Assata Shakur's breakout of prison is coming up on Monday. And in response to her exile from the United States, there were posters covering the United States that said, "Assata is welcome here," all around the world even. "Assata is welcome here. Assata is welcome here." So I want us to say that, but to interchange it with "Veronica is welcome here." Veronica is welcome here, because this is our community. Like, I live here, she's from here, she should be welcome here. So, Assata is welcome here. Veronica is welcome here. 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 Thank you. Woo. All right. So my clock. Okay, I'm in the time. All right. So I was gonna read a poem, but I'm worried it's too long. I'm just gonna read it. Okay. It's called "Enemy of the Sun." I may, if you wish, lose my livelihood. I may sell my shirt and my bed. I may work as a stone cutter, a street sweeper, a porter. I may clean your store or rummage your garbage for food. Oh, enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist. You may take the last strip of my lands. You may plunder my heritage. You may burn my books and my poems or throw my flesh to the dogs. You may spread a web of terror on the rooftops of my village, O enemy of the sun, but I shall not compromise. And to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist. You may put out the light in my eyes. You may deprive me of my mother's kisses. You may destroy my history. You may curse my father, my people. You may deprive my children of their smile and of life's necessities. You may fool my people with a borrowed face. You may spread a wall of terror around me. You may glue my eyes with humiliation, O enemy of the sun. But I shall not compromise. And to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist. O enemy of the sun, the decorations are raised at the port, the exclamations fill the air, the heart is aglow, a sail is seen in the horizon, challenging the wind and the depths. It is Homer, returning home from the sea of losses. The sun has returned together with my exiled ones. For her sake and his, I swear I shall not compromise, and to the last pulse in my veins, I shall resist, I shall resist, I shall resist. So, those words were written by a Palestinian, Sami al-Qasim is how I say it. And this poem was found in the cell of George Jackson, who was a member of the Black Panther Party, after he was murdered. And for a while, actually, folks thought that he had written it. And it strikes me how beautiful that is, that like our struggles have fed and bled into each other, even in the face of impenetrable bars and cages, right? That we're doing that, we've been doing that. So I wanted to open up from that place. Those words meant a lot to George Jackson from what we understand, so thank you. So I was asked to speak about the connections between Black liberation movements happening around the world, but particularly here in the United States right now, and the Palestinian struggle for liberation. And as a starting place, I want to lift up, if it hasn't been mentioned already, that a statement was recently put out written by Black folks and signed by over 1,100 Black people and organizations so far, that spoke to the importance of Black solidarity with the Palestinian struggle. And in that, it outlined both the historical but also the current Black radical solidarity with Palestinians, particularly the history of that solidarity that began primarily in the 1960s, right? 1967, 1968 with Malcolm X, James Baldwin, SNCC, the Black Panthers. They also lift up the similarities that we see in how we are oppressed, particularly through mass incarceration. We know that our police and military forces support and train each other and share resources and technologies and strategies and tactics for how to better oppress us. They talked about the ways that the media is used to help to criminalize our existence and that it seeks to delegitimize our resistance in both cases, in both of our struggles. It also lifted up the specific anti-Black violence that is Israel, highlighting the violence that is played out against Ethiopian Jews and asylum seekers from Sudan and Eritrea. And it ends by talking and suggesting that G4S be a target for further joint struggle, this being the world's largest private security company that profits off of both the Israeli occupation and the oppression of Black people in the United States and around the world. The Juvenile Detention Center, that's not too far away from here, has a contract with them. So that's happened, right? I signed that, and several organizations I'm a part of signed that. There's some things that aren't named that I want to lift up. Also, there are Black Palestinians, right? And that's enough for me, right? Like it's not always just that there are two groups. Like there are people that live at the intersections of those things, and I want to acknowledge that. It didn't talk that much about the ways that Palestinians specifically have supported the struggle for Black liberation. That isn't mentioned as much. And I want to acknowledge that it has gone both ways, right? We see with Muhammad Ali how he is supported by Palestinians. We see with Angela Davis when she is facing the death penalty, right? The Palestinians are showing lots of support for that struggle and to free all political prisoners. And what's not mentioned was that it wasn't just that in past Black liberation struggles or moments, particularly with the Black Panthers, it wasn't just that there was this recognition of joint struggle or like letters of support that were being lifted, but the Black Panthers understood that Palestinian liberation was essential to the global politics of national liberation, right? That Black people could not be free in the United States or anywhere if Palestinians were not free. So it wasn't just this idea of like, oh yeah, everyone, that it wasn't just like, oh yeah, we see this as a problem and we think it should end. It was like our liberation is intricately tied up in this. And that it understood that connection as rooted in colonialism. And it saw a need for a part of anti-blackness needed to address settler colonialism. What else? We see something that I've learned a lot from speaking to folks who organize with AAAN is the ways that imperialism in the Middle East and imperialism rather by the United States throughout the Middle East and throughout the world has, and particularly with the war on terror, is used to create crises amongst particularly the American white people, mainstream society or whatever, as a way to legitimize the increased militarization of the police, right, and increased surveillance of everyone, and that those tactics and those technologies are increased here in the United States under the narrative that it's for the war on terror, but then are used against black people, right? And that the war on terror has very much, the war on terror is, first of all, it wasn't just that it's been imported, it has always been here for black people in this country, but also that when the state isn't able to justify its use of force and its desire for increased use of force, it has used Islamophobia, it has used imperialism to justify buying up all these extra things and implementing all of these new surveillance programs. So there's this well-established history of interconnections between Black and Palestinian struggles that I think we owe ourselves to, and each other, to recognize and to study and to build upon, and to recognize that this isn't new, that this has been happening for a long time. So I also do want to say thank you to folks here and away that have supported the movement for Black Lives. Sincerely, thank you. There were some folks in the room that were literally locked in things around their neck, on their arms, lying on the pavement for 4 hours, that are in this room right now that don't identify as Black, but did that for the liberation, with the belief of Black liberation. So thank you for all the work that has been done and all that will, I know, continue to come. So I'm really struck at how I think both of our struggles are encompassing, this is something that Robin D.G. Kelly said that really stuck with me. He says, these struggles encompass desires and debates about land, distant kinship, religion, and the politics of entitlement. So it's not just, these are really big, heavy conversations that our struggle is forcing us to confront and reckon with. And I think that together they will bring us to broader answers and more holistic solutions. But I think that insisting on similarities can be a problem. I think that it can lead to something like, I would say, transactional forms of solidarity, in which solidarity just comes to mean sameness, right? The things that we understand to be the same about each other, and that's all that we're willing to show up for, and that's all that we're willing to do and engage in. And that sometimes what ends up happening is that we act in solidarity and we identify common enemies as a means to get legitimacy, increase visibility, and broaden our bases. And that, to me, is dangerous when we're talking about liberation. Why do I have to know you to see you and to believe that you're in pain? I shouldn't have to know you. I should just be able to know that you're in pain, and that's enough for me. You have my support. Palestinian people have my support. It doesn't require reciprocity. It doesn't require for me to have a common target. It's enough that you experience what you experience. Boom, right? So you have it. And I also think that, solidarity is not the end goal. The ultimate objective is to completely dismantle the racial regimes themselves and eliminate all forms of oppression, not to be in solidarity, right? That is a means. And so I think we have to understand, again, I'm pulling in Robin D.G. Kelly, the difference between solidarity, slight, and seizure, where solidarity requires us to wrestle with things it will lead us to a point of seeing asymmetry. It will lead us to a point of seeing even antagonisms between our people and between our struggles. And that's a real challenge, right? I'm sitting here very aware of the fact that usually when we talk about Black people suppression, folks, it draws in the idea of the transatlantic trade industry, right? And Middle Passage. But I understand the problem that we're up against is not just United States versions of racism and anti-Blackness, but rather the problem is that there's a global consensus of anti-Blackness, and the Arab slave trade has a lot to do with that as well, and that's something that needs to be acknowledged, right? And that it's not just, I don't just experience this when I live in the United States, but we need to think about the ways that that everywhere around the world, it's acceptable to be anti-Black. In fact, humanity is usually defined around not being Black. And that at the same time, right, that much of black leadership supported Zionism and supported a Zionist project, particularly up until 1967, right? It hasn't been like everyone's been down for Palestine and black liberation struggles, especially before the Black Power movement. And so I also think that the nature of our oppression is fundamentally different. And that's something that people get confused about when I say this, that I actually don't think that black people experience genocide. And I know that that's kind of controversial, but to me, the goal of anti-blackness is not the annihilation or erasure of black people. It is our subjection into something called social death. Social death meaning that we have no motherland, no homeland, just natal alienation. We come from nowhere. That robs us of a sense of homeland, but also of our ability to control our lineage, both where we come from and our descendants. That there's general dishonor. Nobody wants to be black, right? Nobody wants to be black. My understanding is that the word for black in Arabic is slave, that common greetings are, oh, my slave, right? Nobody wants to be black. It's understood to have dishonor with it. And that at any point in time, violence can be done to you randomly for no other reason than that you're black. Sandra Bland, it's because she was black. Right? Eric Garner, because he was black. That's the only reason they need it. It doesn't have to be because they want your land. It doesn't have to be because they even want your labor. Right? There was like, anyways, it's just because you're black. And to be black equals to be a slave. And this is not about like a competing history of oppression, but rather being able to name difference and still acknowledge that we need to work together. And that we're not going to get free unless we work together. And that our struggles are still tied up in each other. But they don't have to be. It's not because they're the same. They don't have to be the same. And if we're trying to build a world that only is able to allow people to live together and support each other if they're the same, I don't want to live in that world. I want a world big enough for us to be different. And so another thing I'll say in that vein is that as a settler colonial state, right, Israel's dependent on Palestinian suffering and death, and that pushes us towards this project of settler decolonization. So I think that if we also, though, engage in dismantling the logic of anti-blackness, that then will require a construction of something even more radical and even more revolutionary. So again, it's not an either or, it's a both and. And so moving forward, I think that's the action that was carried out by several people in this room, myself included, is a model of solidarity, like putting our bodies on the line, and not always because there is a common message or target, but just because it matters and because we need each other. That's enough. That we acknowledge, right, moments like this where like we're having this important conversation and like I mean, really, really essential black leader isn't even allowed to be in this space. Like what does that mean, right? That it happens in a space that like our leadership isn't even, will get arrested if they try to come here. Even though this is her home. But like, yeah. So I think that that's just like naming that, again, it's us. And then I'll say at the end here, right, I hope that one thing I'm really interested in is that both of our struggles can push each other to resist relying on the spectacles of violence that get done to us. It shouldn't have to be that 1,000 people get killed or 1,000 children get killed. It should be enough that you live in an occupied state, right? It should be enough that it's the constant grind of our oppression should be enough. It shouldn't have to be that Mike Brown's body is shot 6 times and left to lay out in the sun for 4 hours in front of his whole family. One shot was all that was needed to kill him, right? I think a lot in black liberation stuff right now, there's all these videos that are constantly being put on our feeds that go viral. And if you aren't convinced yet, you never are going to be. If you need to consume more black death and more black suffering, I don't know what to tell you. Like, there's nothing else that we can do to convince you that we are struggling, right? And we shouldn't, and that when these spectacles happen, we should be outraged, we should be angry, but they shouldn't be the only way that we are able to mobilize and the only narrative that we are giving now as to why we are oppressed. And that's something that, like, I see in black liberation struggle, and I hope that that's something that, like, in solidarity with us, you can also reject and oppose the grind of what we experience just stepping outside, right? Of being stopped and searched for doing nothing. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Paige. Now we'll go to Q&A. And as I said before, there's a microphone right here, and people should line up at the microphone. And you get 1 minute to either ask a question or to make a statement. And we'll take 3 questions at a time. So, fire away.
My question is to Omar. You said that you're often asked what you think the end result of your campaign will look like. So you talked about ending the occupation. Excuse me. I'd like to know exactly what you see Israel looking like. Where do you think the Israeli government would look like, where the borders will be, and how you think, you never mentioned the word peace. I would like to know where you think peace will be attained and how that will look. Thank you.
Since nobody else is at the microphone yet, and that was an excellent question, I'll turn it over to Omar.
As I said, as a human rights movement, we're not the political leadership of the Palestinian people. We cannot answer on behalf of the Palestinians what self-determination at the end should look like. It's up to the Palestinian people, with their elected, democratically elected leadership, which we don't have currently, to decide what is self-determination to us. But we took them basic requirements for self-determination, without which we cannot have self-determination. So ending the occupation is a necessity. The refugees' return is a necessity. That's the majority of the Palestinian people. And certainly ending the system of racial discrimination is a necessity. So what will, said Israel, look like? Again, whatever it looks like, it has to have no oppression of us, and we have to have our full rights in accordance with international law at a very minimal level. You mentioned peace, and thanks for mentioning that. The oppressed communities are very allergic to that term when it's devoid from the J word for justice. Peace without justice is institutionalizing injustice. It's accepting slavery as fate. That's what peace means from a master perspective. When the slave stops resisting, everyone has a peace of mind. No, not everyone. The oppressed don't. So peace to us has one meaning, if it's to be ethical. It has to be based on justice and our rights to have equal rights. Without having equal rights, there can never be a real peace. It will be surrender, not peace.
I know, Omar, you mentioned that BDS doesn't specifically deal with the political realm, the political leadership, but for those of us, students who engage with these issues from a political angle, I have a question regarding the comparison between the ending of apartheid and this current Israeli occupation. What is it going to take for world leaders to respond to this in a way that world leaders responded to apartheid in 1990?
You mean apartheid South Africa?
South Africa,
yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll go to the second and third question, and then Omar can answer that excellent question as well.
Good evening, Omar. Thank you so much for being here. Similar to what Paige brought up around Black Palestinians, I guess my question is, often the Black Palestinian solidarity conversation, often begins around this idea of our connected struggles and how we're similar in a way that kind of confuses me that actual Black Palestinians are not often at the center of that conversation. And I just was curious about your thoughts as to why it is that often we don't hear enough about people like Ali Jeddah and his legacy of work, or the fact that someone like Rilla Jabral, who was very visible, her liberalism, not questionable liberalism and debatable liberalism notwithstanding, the fact that her father is of Nigerian descent, why that's often not a part of the narrative or kind of the interrogation of what does it mean to fight for a Palestinian solidarity and to show up for a Palestinian self-determination that also acknowledges Black people in all different parts of what is Palestine.
Thank you. Sir?
How you doing? I believe my question would be more towards the statements that Paige made. Now, Netanyahu's last visit here to speak on behalf of Congress in direct opposition to President Obama's opinion, do you believe that that stems somewhat from this white supremacist kind of, idea that, because he's a Black president, that it would seem an okay thing to do? Do you think that there's some racial element, some kind of racist element there? Do you believe that if it was a white president, conservative, liberal, it doesn't really matter? Do you believe that he would have done something like that? Do you believe that has some kind of relation to what it is that you were talking about? And if I may, just another quick question to Mr. Barghouti. Okay, it definitely will be quick. How do you respond to this media narrative that if you do implement Palestinian rights, that will indeed run counter to this Zionist dream, which is to have an exclusivist state within Israel, because within historic Palestine, because that seems to be the narrative that the media pervades, that if you implement Palestinian rights, you will destroy exactly, the Jewish people, etc.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we go to Paige to answer his first question, and then we'll go to Omar to answer the previous two questions and his second question. Paige.
Oh man, this is not going to be a good answer. So I think that when I am thinking through anti-blackness, I actually avoid trying to understand individuals like my thoughts and their own individual logics as to why they do what they do, because I think that it's really dangerous that for us to focus on those microaggressions, right? So I have no idea why Netanyahu did that. Probably because he's racist. Like, of course, because he's racist. Like, he wouldn't be doing any of the stuff that he's doing if he wasn't racist. And probably because he's anti-black. But I don't know, and I don't know how. We have to call out the institutions and the state itself, right? And no one that they put in there is going to be okay, because it's the state.
Thank you.
Okay, on the first question, when I asked whether you talk about apartheid South Africa, because apartheid also exists in Palestine. The analysis of the Israeli regime of oppression against Palestinians encompasses occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid. Let me explain the last part because it's not obvious. Israel's occupation of the West Bank is now much more widely recognized as constituting apartheid as well by Jimmy Carter, many Israeli politicians, members of the Knesset, major thought leaders in Israel today acknowledge there is apartheid. The editorial of Haaretz, a key Israeli paper today, actually says Netanyahu's vision of the occupied Palestinian territory is one of apartheid. So it's acknowledged today. What's not acknowledged in Israel, and increasingly acknowledged by human rights activists around the world, is that within the current state of Israel, forget the occupied territories, there is apartheid as well. What is apartheid, though? Some people say, oh, but Palestinians in Israel have the right to vote. Blacks in South Africa could not vote. And blacks in South Africa were a majority, whereas Palestinians in Israel are a minority. Those are completely irrelevant to the United Nations definition of apartheid. I know in the US, when I mention the UN, it's like Swahili. What is he talking about? There's a United Nations. Yes, there is. And we follow the United Nations definitions as the closest thing to justice. So the UN definition, especially the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, define the crime of apartheid, which is a crime against humanity, not just as a South African crime. It's a universal crime when you have racial discrimination and racial injustice by one racial group against another that's legalized and institutionalized and ongoing. So it's not enough to have racist policies when you have a part of the community, part of the citizenry actually, discriminated against by law because they're a different identity, then you get into apartheid, and there are many policies and practices associated with that. At a very basic level, forgetting the occupied territories of the West Bank, Gaza, including East Jerusalem, Israel itself has more than 50 laws that discriminate against its non-Jewish citizens, the indigenous Palestinians, Christians, and Muslims, simply because they're not Jewish. There are many laws in Israel. If you're not Jewish, you're not entitled to the same rights, especially when it comes to land ownership. And some of those laws are very convoluted, not straight. It's a much more evolved apartheid, if you will. It's apartheid 2.0, unlike in South Africa. It's evolved. It's not petty apartheid. It's much more sophisticated in Israel. So we do have a regime of apartheid. But the main question was, when will people recognize the occupation as so dangerous and stand against it as people stood against apartheid? Well, people seem to have a short memory. As an activist, a former activist in the South African anti-apartheid movement, it was not easy. It took about 30 years for people around the world to heed the call from South Africa, which was issued in the 1950s, to boycott apartheid South Africa. It took 30 years to become mainstream, 25 to 30 years. It really took a lot of struggle, especially led by blacks in this country, to reach the level until Reagan was finally forced to take action against apartheid. Forced, after everyone else did, the churches and the unions and the universities and the divestments and so on. It took forever. So we have to put things in perspective. The Palestinian movement for justice and self-determination, in 10 years, in the BDS movement especially, in 10 years achieved far more than was achieved in the South African case. We're getting there, but it's not an easy enemy at all. I mean, Israel is supported by the United States and Europe far more than South Africa's apartheid regime was ever supported. It's based on the history of the Holocaust and how it has been used by Israel to get a lot of support from the West, especially the United States and Germany, and many other aspects, economic, as well as the lobby. The South Africans did not have a lobby half as strong as Israel's lobby in this country, and Israel's lobby is not just the Jewish Israel lobby, the AIPAC, the Christian fundamentalist lobby as well. So we have to take those factors into consideration. But Israel recognizes today that it's losing the battles for hearts and minds. Even in the United States, at a grassroots level, Israel is losing a lot of those battles, convincing people. Thus, they have resorted to the legal warfare, which is a new strategy that they adopted February 2014 against BDS. We can't beat them in debates. They don't debate us, by the way. We beg for a debate in this country. We don't get any takers from the other side. They like to attack us on their op-eds, but when you ask them for a debate, they never show up. The chickens. But regardless, they don't want to debate because they know they really have a very slim chance of success in any debate. How can you argue against justice, equality, and freedom? I mean, it's really difficult. A movement that's based on human rights for everyone, that doesn't discriminate against anyone, it's very difficult to debate us, I have to admit. But anyway, so they resort to legal warfare, trying to pass legislations in states like Illinois, North Carolina, many states, passing legislation attacking BDS, statements or legislation in some states attacking BDS and trying to delegitimize it, which goes against a long history of civil rights in this country where boycott was considered free speech. In 1983, specifically, in the Claiborne case, when Claiborne, a hardware company, sued the NAACP for calling for a boycott against it, and the Supreme Court upheld the right of NAACP to call for a boycott of Claiborne as free speech. Boycott in this country is respected as free speech. So Israel is trying to overturn that, and it won't be an easy job for it. On black Palestinians, I fully agree with Paige on one issue. There is anti-black racism everywhere, and we have to admit that, and we have to fight that. And Palestinians are not pure. We never claimed we're pure. We have many problems as well, social, cultural, and many other problems. Israel's regime of occupation, settler colonialism, and apartheid is our biggest problem, but it's not the only one. We have other problems to deal with. And as I said earlier in a lecture at Northwestern Law School this morning, nothing comes later. I was asked once by Sarah Schulman, the famous Jewish-American LGBT writer and academic, whether gay rights in Palestine should wait until after liberation. And I said, from my perspective as a human rights activist, nothing comes later. It has to start now, in parallel. Nothing comes after. Liberation starts in parallel. So I think we have to address anti-black racism as well in our society. Why black Palestinians are not very prominent? Actually, in Palestine, some of them are quite prominent, quite well known. In the media and in society, they're quite well known. Internationally, less known. Many of them were imprisoned. Many of them prevented from traveling. So it's not very easy either. The last point was about the view in some mainstream media, although it's changing, that BDS and calling for Palestinian rights, especially the right of return, would destroy Israel. And I say one quick response. If freedom, justice, and equality would destroy Israel, what does that say about Israel?
Hello. I just have two very quick questions. The first is, I know BDS has been around for some time, and I'm just curious, how has the movement adapted to changing situations in the region? So can you speak to just specific?
Can you be a bit more specific?
Well, in other words, have all of your arguments and all of your positions been constant for the last, say, 10 years or 8 years or however long it's been? Or have you made emendations, or have you changed it all? And I suppose I'll start with that. The other question just concerns specifically the boycott of education and kind of academia in Israel. And the question there is, at what point is anything really immune from this? And when does it when does it cross over? Where I understand, and I certainly respect everything for the Palestinian, voices, but is there a point at which it starts to violate certain rights of Israelis, of Jews, or whatever, other groups? Those are my questions.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello. I just want to thank the speakers for being here with us today. It's an honor to see you guys, take pictures of you. So I want to ask a question. So, usually the occupation and apartheid from the international community is looked at as Muslims versus Jews, And the Christians, the Palestinian Christians, both in the 48 land and the occupied territories, are usually lost in between. So this question is for you, Omar. And how does the occupation and apartheid, both in Israel and in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, how does the occupation and apartheid affect the Christians and economically, culturally, socially, etc. So.
Thank you. Sir, go with the third question. Third set of questions.
Yeah, a couple of concerns. First, with regard to BDS, which I fully support. What I'd like to know is there a page 2? Because BDS was successful in bringing about the end of apartheid in South Africa. And as you mentioned, it started in the 50s. This is 2015. It has not brought about justice for South Africans. And so that's what I'm trying to get at. The other point I'd like to raise in reference to we charge genocide. Recently, your organization went to the UN to complain. And I'm wondering, other than the UN, for example, there are groups in South America, in the Caribbean, who are, some of the Caribbean states are talking about reparations for indentured slavery. Does your organization have any plans to move into that sphere in terms of Latin America or even in terms of Africa and other groups?
Thank you. And I'll let Paige go first and then turn to Omar to answer the 3 questions and then go to this young woman for the next question.
So, I'm so sorry, I'm a little bit confused. So your question is, have we thought about engaging in organizations in Latin America to call for reparations?
For example, a group of Caribbean states recently met and passed a resolution asking England specifically to pay reparations for their involvement in the slave trade. Mm-hmm. And before America became America, it was an English colony. Okay, so that's kind of
Yeah. As a group, no, is the short answer to your question. We have not thought about how to organize and campaign around calling for reparations from the UN or from anyone. I think this brings up a really important thing, right? We did fight. When we got back, the thing that we did though was we were getting all this attention, and so we immediately threw down to support the local campaign for reparations for the survivors of John Birch torture. And that was again, it's one of those things where the way the history books will write it, it was maybe a 3-month-long campaign, and the mayor did a lot of work. No, it was 40 years of people fighting. And we were lucky, those of us that joined in the last 3 months and were really good at social media, made it really, really visible, and we won. For the first time in the history of the world, reparations are being given out for survivors because of police violence. That has never happened. And I think reparations is interesting. I know there's increasing organizing strategic thinking around what it means to do reparations for the war on drugs. I think that's going to be something that we see more and more of, especially now that so many white people are making millions of dollars off of selling marijuana in legal states. But for me, what's interesting about reparations, I'm all for campaigns for reparations, and I'm all for calling for them and demanding them and organizing around getting them. But to me, right, our oppression is not just one that is economic. right? There's a lot of other pieces to it. And so for me, what's most interesting about reparations is when you open up the space to have that conversation and take it seriously, what it means to think through, you know, what about Black women and like how we were not just like forced to labor, but that we were also like forced, like the way sexual violence, the role of sexual violence in anti-Blackness, and even constructing anti-Blackness was extremely gendered in that way, right? And so what does it mean to give reparations to work that has never been seen as like something that you pay for, right? When you start looking at the intersections of race and class and gender in that conversation, I think it's really interesting. And it's not so much who deserves more, but just I think particularly because of the ways that Black struggle has been narrated as very masculine and Black freedom dreams have been very masculinized, I think it's an interesting way to talk about Black women and the struggle that we have experienced as Black women and as Black queer people and as Black trans people. The other thing that I want to say about reparations is I think what they offer is less, I don't actually believe in reparations as a way to free us, I believe in them as a way to break the system. To have that moment of like, you cannot pay for this. And when we were at the UN, there was this really beautiful moment where, so we were actually charging torture. Our name is We Charge Genocide, which I don't believe in, but whatever. It's because of a petition that was filed in 1951, and so we contextualized our work with that name. But we were there engaging in the Convention Against Torture specifically, and one of the folks who serves on that committee is from Ghana, and he was saying, you know, at some point, and he was specifically talking to solitary confinement, he's like, at some point, that like, because by international law, you're supposed to pay reparations if you torture people, which solitary confinement is torture according to international law. But at some point, money is not enough to repay the loss of human dignity. Like, no money is going to bring Ayanna Jones back. No money will bring Sandra Black. No money will, like, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight for it. Yes, we should fight for it. But for me, I want to make sure we're holding on as Black people to the larger vision beyond that. That's like, it's not so that we can be rich too.
Yeah,
And I don't think you were saying that.
I wasn't limiting it to reparations. I was just thinking more in terms of getting governments in various parts of the world to support the whole issue of African American oppression within the United States.
Yes.
And reparations as a part of that.
Let's do it.
So it's not limited to that.
I'm for it.
Thank you. Omar.
I'll start with the issue of reparations in answering your question to me, which is very important, I think. The issue about justice in South Africa. In 1994, they had the first democratic elections. Apartheid as a political system collapsed, but not as an economic system.
Right.
Economic apartheid is live and well. The wealth in the country is still controlled by whites. And blacks, they're token blacks up in power here and there. But economically, they're still very much disempowered. Blacks are still very poor in South Africa. And I think this brings up the issue of reparations. We cannot talk about justice without reparations. As a minimum, we've got to have reparations to bring us up to level 0. Because as oppressed communities, we're below 0. And there's no liberation project that can start really in building your social rights, your cultural rights, your other political rights, without having you economically at least at level 0. When you're below 0, you need reparations. They have to pay for what they've done to us. It's certainly not enough. It will not bring back the dignity that we lost all those years. But it's a minimum requirement that we must insist on, I agree. And in South Africa, had they insisted on that, I think things would have been a bit different. But it's not up to me to judge. We trust our brothers and sisters there. On the issue of whether BDS has adapted over the years, in the last 10 years, it's been around for 10 years, with the situation in the region, I'm still confused about what aspect of the situation in the region. But just to explain, BDS, part of it is not very flexible, which is the rights part. Our basic rights under international law is not up to negotiation. If it's inconvenient to some people to acknowledge our rights, well, tough. Those are our rights. The second part of BDS, the tactics and the strategies to achieve our rights, that is definitely nuanced and what we call context sensitive. The most important operational principle in the BDS movement, and I think part of the reason of its success over the last 10 years in such enormous growth over 10 years, is context sensitivity, which means in any particular context, we defer to activists, to leaders in that context to decide what's best, what works best in their context. What we call for in Johannesburg in BDS is far greater than what we call for in Berlin, for obvious reasons. So we have to adapt our tactics and strategies based on the context. Very, very quickly, there are 3 criteria for selecting BDS targets. which are very important to mention. First, the level of complicity. The more complicit a company is, obviously, the better target it makes, because we can mobilize mass pressure against it. Second, intersectionality, the potential for intersectionality. If a company oppresses black and brown communities in the United States, it makes sense to start with that, to make those connections. It's a very basic level of connection, and I fully agree with Paige. It's not enough to have a common target. That's not what intersectionality ends with. It begins with that. Identifying common target is very important. The third criterion, which activists often forget, human rights activists really often forget, the potential for success. We're not in it for fun. We're in it to achieve our rights. Sometimes it is fun, but we don't do it for fun. We don't do BDS for fun. We do it to achieve our rights. If we're not goal-oriented, if we do not measure our success or failure and adapt our tactics, we're not good human rights activists. We have good slogans, but we're not good activists. We're not resisting properly. So let's keep that in mind. The last question on Palestinian Christians. Because BDS is completely non-sectarian, we don't even use terms Muslims and Christians within the movement. It's just, or Jewish, it's just not there. We have Jewish Palestinians, some Israelis, Jewish Israelis who identify as Palestinians. They're against the system, and the movement is open to everyone. It's an inclusive movement. But certainly what you mentioned is important, and it's often not talked about. Reducing this essentially colonial and apartheid struggle to a religious struggle, which is exactly what Netanyahu is trying to do, is extremely wrong and extremely dangerous. Extremely dangerous. This is not about Judaism. It is not about Jews. We've got to think out of that Jewish box that Netanyahu is trying to put us in. It's against a colonial system. It's against an apartheid system. We couldn't care less if our oppressors were Christian, Muslim, Hindu, or Jew, or atheists. As long as they're oppressing us, as long as their boots are on our necks, we'll continue to resist them. That's the key. It's against oppression. It's not against an identity. Therefore, in BDS, we never support identity-based targets. We don't target any company because of its identity. It's Israeli, it's American, it doesn't matter. It's involved or not involved in oppressing us. That's how we identify it. If it's an Arab company or an Israeli company or a French company, it does not matter. But having said that, certainly Christian Palestinians are not mentioned, and for very good reasons. The Zionist establishment does not want to mention them, and they only mention them in a very utilitarian way. Oh, look at Christians in Israel, they're enjoying life much more than Christians in, I don't know, Iraq, for example. Yeah, that's why so many churches are being burnt down, like the Church of Loaves and Fish within the proper state of Israel. And the criminals who set churches on fire are getting away with nothing. There's total impunity. If you commit crimes against Palestinians, be them Christian or Muslim, you get away with it. As Gideon Levy, a famous Israeli journalist, once wrote, in more than 99% of the crimes committed by settlers in the occupied Palestinian territory, no one was sentenced. No one. So it's cheap. Palestinian life is cheap. Palestinian churches and mosques are cheap. It's okay to burn them. It's okay to burn the Dawabshi family alive. It's okay. You get away with that. But it's very important to assert that Christian Palestinians are suffering like the rest of Palestinians in so many ways, from freedom of movement to reach Bethlehem, to reach Jerusalem for prayer and so on, and in many other ways. And finally, it's very important to remember that it's not an identity-based struggle. It's a struggle for liberation.
Good, thank you.
Because of a shortage of time, these are going to be the last set of questions that we're going to be taking for today.
Okay, this will be the last 3 questions.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very informative. I wanted to draw attention to the recent anti-BDS laws that have been passed, including by our own governor, Bruce Rauner. And I was wondering, is this a violation of freedom of speech? And will this slow down the BDS movement? And if so, how can we confront this? And also, I was also curious, regarding the fact that you said in South Africa, it was the BDS movement that freed the apartheid in South Africa. It was very influential. Were there any anti-BDS laws passed at that time?
Well, not BDS. BDS is a Palestinian term. Anti-boycott laws. Okay.
Whatever. Yeah, what I meant. That's what I meant, yes.
Okay, the next question.
Sure.
Paige, I really appreciated your reminder that solidarity isn't the end goal, and that liberation is in dismantling these racial regimes. So I was just hoping, folks, both of you, could elaborate on the importance of vision and visionary politics in your organizing. Thanks.
Hi, Paige. My question is more related to you. So you talked about a little bit about anti-Blackness, and if anti-Blackness is kind of a global issue and very prevalent in a lot of like a multitude of different communities, do you think that this concept of anti-Blackness hinders the Black community in specific to work in solidarity with other liberation movements, and if so, how do we combat that?
I'll start with you, Paige, and then go to Omar.
Okay. So I think, not if I'm right and go like this if I'm wrong, but that last question was around, so does anti-Blackness essentially like bleed into Black community? Where did the person go? Just ask that. Is that right?
Does it prevent you
like
from
kind
working
of,
with
but
other
also like since anti-Blackness is prevalent in other communities, does that hinder our ability to work in solidarity with them? And if so, how do we combat that?
Yeah, I think that, okay, so I'll take that part first. So yes, I think it does, right? That there are, and this is less around, I don't want to like pit movements against each other, but just organizations, specific partnerships that have happened like in my lifetime and before. There is a long history, and I'll just focus on the anti-Blackness piece because I know we do this to other people. But that a lot of times, right, people only are willing to relate to Black struggle through metaphor, right? And they're only interested in using Black struggle as a way to, like, they want to pull our Martin Luther King, right? Like, straight up, like, the t-shirts that say, like, gay is the new Black, like, that exists, that's a thing, right? This is a civil rights issue, and they're tapping in to what is now understood to be important and like important both in why it was happening but also how it was happening. And so I think that's something that Black people have become quite wary of, because there is a long history of Black folks, when push comes to shove, we get abandoned, right? That we'll have a people of color coalition or a working class coalition and we're the first to get dropped, right? Or that we inevitably will get dropped. And there's plenty of historical evidence to suggest that. Nonetheless, we believe in supporting each other, right? And we cannot do it alone, right? Like, solidarity doesn't happen because we think it's like a cute, fun thing to do. It's because we need to be in solidarity. It will never work if we are not. And so again and again and again, we show up for each other and we invite people to join us. And I think that we have to be real, though, about how, in understanding that history so that we can keep an eye out for it. And I think that folks need to appreciate, right, there's a lot of resistance to Black-only spaces that I see a lot, and I'm a part of 2 Black-only organizations. And people just need to get comfortable that sometimes we need our own space, and we deserve that, and that should just be okay, right? And there's reasons why we have that, and that's one of them. So yes, it is a problem. Does it limit us? No, it's just one of many things that we have to deal with. As far as the importance of visionary politics, I mean, to me, that's everything, right? This is why I think art and poetry are, like, any art is really important to our movement work, is because I think art, right, it opens up the possibility for new logics. It's a way to communicate things that we don't even have words for, right? And to share an experience that we cannot necessarily name with the limits of our language. And I think that people need immediate material improvements in their lives, right? If we want to have a mass movement, I'm talking particularly around like Black folks, like we need to be providing immediate benefits. That's why Black Panthers, more than anything, were out there doing breakfast programs. Right? They were providing and meeting the needs of the people. And then at the same time, as challenging directly the cops, right, and imagining a different world and articulating that vision for a different world. So we need that material gain, but also people will stay with the fight because usually we don't win, right? Successes are important, but usually, right, it's 40 years and maybe you get a win that's kind of a win, but you're also like, we didn't get everything, but we're going to say, yay, we got everything. But that you have to, if you don't have that vision, you lose folks. Like, that's what holds people there. So like everything I do, any action I coordinate, any speech I give, like panels might be the exception to the rule, especially when I'm half hour late. I think through like what do people need to know? What do people need to do? But what do people need to feel? Right? That's sometimes the hardest. But I think it's ultimately the most important, and it's why people invite me to talk at things. Yeah. I'll stop.
Thank you, Paige. Omar?
Thanks, Paige. I can't add anything to that. Explaining the importance of vision. You put it very eloquently. I think, yes, you have to be inspired and to inspire others. It's very important in any movement to really be inspired and to inspire others, to motivate others, not just to give them facts and dry statistics and we're living in poverty and health situation and schools and so on. That's important. But it's a feeling, it's a gut feeling. that this is a situation of injustice that people should not tolerate. To convey that motivation to people is very difficult. So you have to have a clear vision about what you're reaching out to and how that can motivate people. On anti-boycott laws in the South African anti-apartheid movement era, I was a student. I did not know. I wouldn't know now, actually. I did not research that, whether there were any anti-boycott laws passed in the US or elsewhere. I'm not aware of any. I have never heard from fellow activists of any anti-boycott laws. Boycott, especially in this country, is taken very seriously as freedom of speech. Not in France, not in other countries, Germany. I mean, Europeans are way behind the United States as far as respect for freedom of speech. So in this country, with all the problems you have, this is one thing that's really good here, freedom of speech. So protect it. It's really, really important. But Israel is testing the limits. As I once said to I think the New York Times, in an interview about Israel trying to pass anti-BDS legislation in this country, and very successful at the state legislatures level, and even in Congress to a large extent. And I said, what would Rosa Parks think? I mean, if Israel is trying to undermine decades of civil rights in this country until they won the right to boycott, to change an oppressive, economic, racially oppressive system, or companies, or policies, that's a hard-won prize for the civil rights movement that should not be given up easily. Israel is increasingly pushing for a new McCarthyism, no less, a new McCarthyism, with loyalty to Israel being the new litmus test of loyalty. And it's very dangerous, not just for Palestinians. It's certainly dangerous for us. It's dangerous for any progressive movement in this country. If they get away with anti-BDS legislation, there's no telling who's next. Any oppressive group can then pass anti-struggle legislation and criminalize our struggles, and not just as a figure of speech, literally, legally, make it criminal to do things that we take for granted today in this country, that you take for granted today. I'm not living in this country. So it's very important to counter Israel's new McCarthyism for the benefit of everyone who's interested in social, racial, and economic justice in this country. And I think a very important point is that with Israel's attempt to delegitimize BDS through the legal system and through legislatures, it has actually shot itself in the foot, in a way. It has opened up liberal circles that we had never reached before to counter Israel's attacks by saying this is anti-free speech. I'll give you an example. Last year at Brooklyn College, I was invited to speak with Professor Judith Butler, who's a very famous Jewish-American philosopher and gender scholar. And we were attacked by the media, by the city council, by you name it, in New York. I mean, it seemed like the entire New York establishment had nothing to worry about in New York. You know, there were no problems in New York, except this little Brooklyn College having a little event by some BDS supporters and a famous Jewish-American professor. They threatened to defund Brooklyn College. To defund Brooklyn, it's a state-run college. They threatened to defund it because of having this event sponsored by the political science department. The mayor of New York, who was then Bloomberg, not exactly a fan of BDS, said those who want to criminalize speech in this country should go to North Korea. Bloomberg defended our right to do BDS at Brooklyn College, and he's completely against Palestinian rights, period. Forget BDS. I mean, ending occupation to him is extremely radical. The New York Times defended our right to have BDS activism. They said we completely oppose BDS, but they have a right. It's free speech. So it won't be easy. Liberal America, as it were, will stand up against this. With all their problems, they'll stand up against this. But we have to be very, very vigilant at how Israel is corrupting this legal system, really corrupting it, reaching it to a level far beyond its already very corrupt nature. Thank you.
I would like to thank all of you for coming out this evening and for asking excellent questions. They were all terrific. And I would ask that you would give a round of applause to Omar Barghouti and Ed Smith. that concludes this evening's event. Thank you.